We spent a very long, very well spent, worthwhile time on networking concepts and networking vulnerabilities. We talked about OSI and wireless and Bluetooth and network devices and network security and protocols. Of course, networking is all about data. So let's talk about managing data, whether it's on a network or not. Let's talk about, first of all, data classification. Not all data is meant for all eyes, right, or all ears. There are several different classification levels, and you may even have more. If you're in the military, you'll of course see others. You'll see classified and secret and top secret. But in the private sector, we tend to call things public or confidential or private or sensitive. The main thing is that, and it doesn't really matter if we're going to call this confidential or we're going to call that sensitive. The main thing is that there is some procedure in place for identifying what does constitute confidential or sensitive. Confidential would be generally things that would be personally identifiable. Employee social security numbers, health information, salaries that they make, stuff that not everybody should know. Sensitive is not so much personally identifiable, but things that we really shouldn't let the general public see, like sales figures or just internal operational stuff that's really not meant for just everybody. And then you can have flat out private, which can really refer to an individual. So while confidential, while we might say that your salary will be confidential and your health information will be confidential, we can also have just downright private that is just for this individual. And so, like, for example, when I was working around health clinics, only certain people, only the immediate health provider for that patient was allowed to see that really private information, that health history. Now, there could be some other confidential information that wasn't like, well, exactly what dosages and what's your diagnosis, but that maybe a health official could see. But if it's really private and just specific to an individual, then it should only be viewable by the immediate healthcare provider and not some government official or a hospital administrator. So you have to determine now what is the categorization and the classification of your data. If you're in the military, you're also going to have things like classified and secret and top secret as well. So just as an IS auditor, see if there is a description in policy that describes how to classify data and see if it is being classified. And different classifications of data should be handled and stored differently. And some of it, like if it's really private, maybe it should be encrypted. If it's confidential, it certainly should have access controls on it. Sensitive, maybe you don't have so many access controls, but you make sure that nobody accidentally attaches a spreadsheet in an email sending it out outside of your organization. Whereas with public, that is meant to be viewed by the general public. Even so, you don't want people tampering with it. You want it to still maintain its integrity, but you want it to be completely viewable. So when we talk about these different classification levels, we see that there's personal confidential, corporate confidential, sensitive public. There's client confidential, like maybe it's information about a client or a customer, or it's private, or it's a trade secret. Just see what sorts of classifications there are being used and how they're being defined and how they're being protected. If it's confidential, we'll want to store it. Carefully. We'll make sure that the hard drives are protected if we take them out, anti-static bags. Magnetic media, you want to stack it up, don't lay it flat. Keep it away from anything that could inadvertently wipe it out, like fans or motors. And to keep it in acid-free containers so that if it's stored over a long period of time, nothing happens to it. Floppy disks, which, you may still have floppy disks, but you can also think of any magnetic media. Don't actually write on it with like a pen. Some people have taken, and we're talking about the really big floppies that are sensitive, and they've written hard on it, and now you damage it. Use felt tip pens, and that's really true also with like CDs and DVDs. Too easy to damage them. But also with CDs and DVDs, don't go bending them or long exposure to anything. And even long exposure to water, even though they're kind of plastic encased, water can get in and destroy them. For transporting confidential data and storing it, of course, with all this stuff, keep it out of direct sunlight, keep it out of too much moisture, keep it out of dusty areas, try not to get liquids on them, avoid magnetic fields or electronic devices, monitors, speakers, fans, motors, anything that could generate some kind of field. If it's optical media, you don't worry about that so much, but if it's magnetic media, that's a whole different thing. Try not to transport during any strong magnetic storm. Well, I mean, you need to protect it because it's possible that you'll have static and you'll have lightning strikes or whatever. And so we just want to protect our media, especially if it's magnetic media, away from any electromagnetic interference or force. And then, of course, if the manufacturer has any recommendations for humidity and temperature and ways of storage, you want to follow all those things. For disposing this stuff, you need to have some kind of procedure in place. Typically it's shredding. Like I remember working in a financial firm, and they had special trash bins that were locked and meant specifically for shredding. And so anything, even if it wasn't particularly confidential, if it was even the least bit sensitive, if it was just internal operational stuff, we threw it right in that bin and it went straight to the shredder. So make sure that there are proper disposal procedures for printed stuff and magnetic media, and also hard drives and stuff too. There are organizations that will give away their computers to charity, but what do you do with all the data on the hard drives? Some of them just simply won't include hard drives. They'll replace them. Some of them, it's good enough to degauss the hard drive. Some of them, it's so sensitive that the only thing they'll do is destroy the hard drive to absolutely make sure that no one is getting that last little bit of magnetic imprint off that drive. So how do we evaluate the confidential information process and procedure? The big thing is we want to see their documentation. How do you intend to treat this stuff? And does it comply with any legal, regulatory, or contractual requirement? We want to verify that they're in compliance. And we want to make sure that they have a method for classifying data, and that they are classifying the data, and that they're handling data that's classified different ways accordingly, storing it, transporting it, protecting it. We want to make sure that media, of course, is labeled such that we know its classification and that we know its creation date and any other labeling. And we want to make sure that everybody knows how to handle this, that they have awareness, and that they're not just carelessly leaving things around. Because I have seen people carelessly leave stuff around that was sensitive or confidential. They leave it waiting to be destroyed, and it's just sitting there by a stairwell, out the back, on the warehouse dock, whatever. And that's because somebody wasn't trained well enough or just simply wasn't following procedure. And with that, that is lesson 6.